Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Scene, the podcast about music and mental health. My name is Jeremy Houtsma, and I am your host. My guest today is Orion Walsh from the band Slow Coming Day. Orion and I talk about his music and his mental health and the impact of his father dying when he was 15. We also talk about music as a catalyst for therapy and also about his own healing journey. So with that said, welcome to The Scene. Well, it's kind of serendipitous. I was unsure. I did not know that you were going to be doing some kind of shows in the next coming weeks. So
yeah,
pretty cool.
Cool. It's exciting. We've done a couple shows already. So last year, because it's been 20 years.
Wow.
So time flies. So it was 20 years ago that we put our album out with Tooth and Nail, and so I'm friends with all the guys in the band, but some of us live in different states, but most of the guys still live in California. So and I'm in Nebraska now. Where are you at?
I'm in Washington State.
Oh, cool.
Kind of right outside Portland. I'm originally from New Jersey, but moved out here a long time ago, about 15 years ago. So everything's on the West Coast. It's hard because like when I do a lot of these interviews, it's a lot of people on the East Coast. So there's this 3-hour time difference. I rarely get people from the West Coast. So Central time is perfect for me. So
cool.
So kind of So just tell me a little bit about how this kind of came about. It's 20 years. Are you guys doing full band? Are you doing?
Yeah, we did full band already. So we played one show at a festival in Illinois. We played at Audio Feed Festival with the full band.
Okay.
And then we also played with, by the way, almost all the original band members.
Oh, nice.
So we played the festival. Our original guitar player couldn't come out for that, but our friend filled in. And then we did 2 shows in we did 3 shows in California. 3 shows in California with all the original lineup.
Okay.
So
awesome.
Like the original lineup of Farewell to Familiar. And even before that, our EP called The Part of Me Died, which was basically it was self-released, but it was on a militia group.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so we did a reunion show with all those original guys. And it was really fun. We played in Central California and we played in LA proper. So
nice. And
we played with Wachachiwa. And now coming up, this April, we're doing a tour, but it's just going to be me playing acoustic guitar, and then one of the original guitar player who plays on Farewell to Familiar, Brad, will play acoustic with me, and then the Brandon Queen, who was a bassist right before the band broke up, he's going to play bass with us. So it'll be acoustic, and our original drummer will probably show up too, because he lives in 29 Palms. It's Palm Springs area.
Yeah.
So it's not too far. On that tour, we're playing Oceanside, near San Diego. We're playing Costa Mesa, which is Orange County. Yeah. And that's where we're from. That's where we're originally from. I'm the only one that moved back to my hometown. So
I was going to ask you, where you grew up. Did you grow up in Nebraska?
Yeah, I grew up in Lincoln, so the capital city. And so I grew up here. I moved away and went to college in Southern California. Okay. And that's how the band started, is what we were just friends from college.
What college did you go
to? Vanguard University and also Orange Coast College. So, but Vanguard, it's a private school, and it's basically across the street from OCC. So I ended up going there, and then I ended up dropping out to do my general eds because it was just way cheaper. Yeah. And then I went back there, and I never graduated because the band got signed right around the time that I was a junior in college. Okay. So that does date me, but that does date me a bit. So yeah.
Well, I just kind of wanted to ask you, just starting out, just kind of the form of the podcast is more of just a free flow kind of conversation.
Sure.
It just kind of goes where it goes. I mean, there's times when we've gone off into weird different places with other people, whether that's education or philosophy or any of those types of things.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm a mental health therapist by trade, so I just love asking questions and finding things out about people.
Awesome.
So
yeah.
That's kind of my my deal.
Cool,
and
cool.
and I have a little bit of a bent towards mental health. Whether or not somebody is comfortable with that is completely up to them about
Yeah,
that.
we can talk a little about that too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's
so
cool.
I just love to like find out just it, for you, what was growing up like in terms of music? Like, what was music around in the house? What are some of your kind of like first memories about music in general, I suppose?
Okay, yeah. That's a good question, Jeremy. Yeah. Well, I remember coming back from school, like growing up in Lincoln, and like coming back from school, my dad would be still at work and my stepmom would be still at work, and I would basically like take the music that my dad was listening to and listen to that.
Right.
So I was kind of early on, I was like trying to discover something that other people weren't listening to that were my age,
Yeah.
And that basically, I mean, but I do think that a lot of us do listen to like some of the music from our parents. But
oh, sure,
that's
sure.
how,
yeah,
that's how I started. So it's like I would come and I would take a Beatles CD, I would put it on, and I would just listen to that CD. And yeah, that's how I remember like first sitting down, listening to the Beatles, listening to bands like America and classic rock bands that my dad listened to, but especially the Beatles and especially America stand out as like ones I listened to when I was like 10 years old.
What's your favorite America song?
That's hard. That's a hard question. I mean, Horse with No Name is really well done, and that's the most popular one. But
right,
there's a lot of other ones that are great. Like, yeah. I mean, there's
is it Oz? Is it
yeah.
was that the yeah? Okay,
Oz is a great song too,
I
yeah.
have a live album of theirs like somewhere on my computer. It's on I love listening to.
Yeah, and ironically, that was my first concert that I ever went to.
Oh,
so
really?
like, America played at the Nebraska State Fair, and my mom took me to that show. And so, yeah, I mean, it is kind of interesting because now I do acoustic music.
Yeah,
I've done like since Slow Me Day ended, I've done acoustic folk music for years and years. I've done the folk thing longer than the emo thing.
right.
But sometimes they interweave.
Okay.
So
yeah, I'm curious about that though. How does that interweave? Like, I always get curious about how people, like, I've talked to different band members who have separate bands, and I'm always kind of curious about how people like either weave different styles or just and I think I was talking about with Josh Hagwitz, The Beautiful Mistake, because he has separate projects, and I was like, how do you know how to write something for The Beautiful Mistake, and how do you write something for your other band like Saint Valletta or
yeah, that can be tricky. Yeah, but it is nice to have diversity like that, because then you get to like, you don't have to always be writing in one, you're not confined to one niche or one genre. So yeah, and that's kind of like, I got tired of writing folk music because I had been doing it for so many years, and that's when Slow Coming Day actually did a new album, but it was not really the way that you usually do an album. It was in 2019. It was like I would write a part or whatever, and I would send it off through email. And so the whole album that we had that we put out on IndieVision, not a lot of people heard that, maybe 10,000 people or so. But that album was done all through email. And so, it was cool to like take a break from writing folk music. And it is hard sometimes when you write a song and you're like, is this song Slow Coming Day, or is this like a solo song? And even one of my friends said when I was doing some of the Slow Coming Day, well, we did an acoustic album during 2020. I was stuck at home. I had 50 tour dates that were canceled because I still make most of my music. I still make most of my money from doing music, actually.
Okay.
So, and believe it or not, like doing the solo thing, I do better than I did when I was a kid in Slow Coming Day. But I'm still, it's not, I'm not getting rich from this, but yeah, I mean, but I'm able to do the normal things that people do, like have food and pay the rent and things like that with music.
Yeah.
But all that being said, we did an acoustic EP, and during that time, I remember some of my friends said, "Well, what's the difference between your solo stuff and Slow Coming Day now? Because this is acoustic."
So yeah.
But I'm like, this isn't folk; it's acoustic emo.
Right.
So it's hard to. Sometimes the lines blur pretty hard, and even some of my songs that are on my solo stuff, they have some emo indie rock tinge to them.
Right.
You know, and even if I pulled up my Spotify, like most listened to stuff, you would see that it's like indie rock.
Right.
And
right.
it's not all just folk music. I listen to other stuff, you know.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I was gonna say I've often found sometimes that like what I write versus what I listen to can sometimes be very, very different. Like what comes out of me versus like what I'm inputting into myself. Like I have a hard time accessing something like, well, I'm gonna write like something harder in the vein of like, you know, something that's like post-hardcore versus like I'll just sit down and write something and be like, that sounds more pop. It's just kind of like, is there like a thing? Is there intentionality that you come to when you write a Slow Coming Day song versus like, you know, your
for sure. There's because Slow Coming Day isn't my main project anymore,
right?
Because like it was a band from 2001 to 2006, and then it was my main project, and all the songs I wrote were strictly for Slow Coming Day, and I didn't do solo stuff. But then coming back to it because I was bored of folk music for a bit, and also because of the emo revival happening, like all the bands coming up, like The Beautiful Mistake. I mean, they have screamo parts too, but like, you know, Emery and May, they stayed bands, you know, and Thursday and stuff. But like all these other bands that have coming back out of the woodworks, like Spitalfield, or you know, like the Get Up Kids came back, or I mean, Jimmy Eat World. We always had Jimmy Eat World, you know. But that's kind of like birth of me sitting down and intentionally, to answer your question, intentionally writing songs that were going to be for Slow Coming Day,
right?
And so some of those came out of like the 2019 album, which was we put out with Indie Vision. So the hard part is because that's a small label, they can't give money for like a recording budget, or like because all of us were living in different places, we can't go into the recording studio like, you know, like Beautiful Mistake does it because they actually like fly all together, and then they like play together as a band. But we didn't do that because we're working on like on an indie budget, you know,
right.
like a low budget. So what I wanted to say is when we put that album out, it was good and it was fun, and like some people knew about it, but not a lot of people, because Indie Vision Music doesn't have the kind of budget where they can be like, here's $5,000 to market this album. You know, it wasn't like that. Where when we were on Tooth and Nail, that was the case. In Tooth and Nail, they paid that, you know, they would pay for marketing of the album. So, but for sure with writing, to answer your question, there's definitely like being intentional with writing those songs. And just to get myself in that writing vein, I kind of started off with a song that we had already written from 2003 that was never recorded. So, and that ended up being like the song that people like the most. So I think, you know, it's with Slow Coming Day, it's like more of a nostalgia project. You know, it's a nostalgia project, you know?
Well, I think that's really cool, just in terms of like how, like picking up a song from 20 years, like, you know, 20 years ago, and like trying to re-engage with that as somebody who's 20 years older. Like, what was that like for you? Like, was it hard to pick that song back up, or is it just like, I have the pieces of something and I'm going to like access certain parts of myself to kind of help write that? Like, what was that process like?
I think I did have to, as you said, I had to access certain parts of myself to write that, to get into that headspace. But also I think, like pulling on the nostalgia factor, remembering what it was like to be in that place. But also I changed some of the lyrics, because even on that one song, the song's called First Sight. And I think when we originally had the song, it was called The Day We Met. It's about a girl that I originally, like one of my first love. And so, but we're still friends today. And like, it didn't work out between us, but so I kind of changed the lyrics to talk about it. And it was interesting because like on YouTube, when they posted the video, there was a guy, or maybe it was a gal, I'm not sure. And they said, this really sounds like a love letter to Slow Coming Day. Like you knew Slow Coming Day and what it could have been if it would have still been a project, it still would have been a band. And so most of the stuff that we came out with is like really hard on the nostalgic factor, and just really, you know, going back into songs about relationships, and about either heartache or love, or, you know, the stuff that pulls on the heartstrings pretty hard. And sometimes I talk about politics or God or like subjects that people don't want to talk about. But yeah, there's some of that in there just because sometimes I like talking about those subjects.
Yeah.
But overall, it was mostly pulling on feelings from the past.
Yeah. So speaking of the past, just kind of going back to like childhood and a little bit of stuff like that, like what in one of the questions I love to ask is like, what is a piece of music or something that hit you in a particular way that was like, oh, this is different, or like this is made you feel something emotional in a way that like music hadn't beforehand?
I think a lot of stuff changed for me when I went to college because, like, growing up in Nebraska and never having gone to the West Coast, I mean, you guys have so much on the West Coast. I mean, actually, like amazing bands, like amazing, like scenery. I mean, nature as well.
Yeah.
And the mentality of the people. And so, like, the records I kind of had was just like records from like album CDs from like that I got as like my friends listened to that were on Tooth and Nail, like Tooth and Nail bands like MXPX or Stave Saker or Goaty Hook or like punk bands.
Yeah.
And then I also was listening to like Nirvana or Foo Fighters or like even like you could say that before I went to college, I basically listened to grunge right. and punk. And when I went to college, my roommate, sometimes the people we spend the most time with really do affect us.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And is what I've learned at this point in my life. And I can kind of get it because he showed me these bands like the Appleseed Cast, and he showed me Jimmy Eat World. He showed me the Get Up Kids, and all the people on my floor that some of them were listening to punk, like pop punk, like Blink-182 or like Strung Out or, No Effects. Right. And so I started to get into emo and punk really, 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 really heavily, really heavily. And I was going to shows all the time. And I played in a punk band initially, and then I started Slow Coming Day, which was a side project to the punk band.
Gotcha.
It wasn't the main band. And what I wanted to say was one piece of music, to answer your question fully, one piece of music that really fully hit me in the heartstrings and really, I don't know if it changed my life, but it really made a big, big impact on me, are two albums. One was Jimmy Eat World Clarity. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Eat World Clarity. And that is so, man, I would almost say it's life-changing. I mean, they really made almost a masterpiece album.
Right. Yeah. It's a front to back.
Yeah. It's front to back. Album, and it still holds up 20 years later.
Yeah.
Or no, 100%. 25 years later. It's 25 years later. And the second one would be Something to Write Home About by the Get Up Kids, and just the lyrical content in the Get Up Kids and like what they're writing about is really, really great. And I remember the drummer of Slow Coming Day, that CD was stuck in his CD player and he couldn't get it out. And it was stuck like that. And I would ride with him because I was kind of afraid to drive on the freeway when I first moved to Southern California. So I would ride around a lot with him. And so we listened to that just almost nonstop for 6 months. Those two albums really did. Yeah. And those two albums really influenced our music as a band too.
Was it lyrically or was it just the, styling of the music for yourself? Like what, were you at a certain place in your life, like either mentally, emotionally that kind of spoke to you?
Yeah, I was super homesick.
Yeah.
Because I had just gone to college and I had only visited California once. I didn't know anyone there. When I moved away, I moved 1,500 miles away from my home and I didn't know anyone. So Something to Write Home About, that whole album really, for lyrically, but also musically. So it was it's like, whoa, this cool thing is going on. This emo indie rock thing. A lot of people didn't want to call it emo, but when Dashboard came around, they did, then it became basically mainstream, like MTV music. But what younger kids now think emo is not what we thought it was.
Right.
So that's it. It's kind of interesting. I mean, not to go off on that
no,
road,
go for it, man.
But there is, in fact, a difference because I've gone to some of these emo nights, and there is just a difference. And I've talked to people, and there was younger people that came to our reunion shows, and that's cool. And I think it's cool that the younger people are discovering this music, or for some of them, it was like a brother or a sister that played this music.
Right.
And it's like nostalgia for them too. But yeah, it's interesting how history remembers things.
Well, you'll see a lot of these festivals too now. There's like one that I saw in London that was called like Emo Fest, and it was like Good Charlotte and Blink 182, and like I was like, I mean, not to be that guy, but like, you know what I mean? You're like that doesn't really fit the like, you know, there's been so many waves of emo, so to speak.
Yeah.
But there's the marketing of the word, right? And the style of the word, and then like the actual history, I guess, behind the music, right?
Right, exactly. And I think basically they've just kind of switched that word from what it should be called pop punk, right. And they also call that emo. And you know, that's fine. It's just it is what it is. I'm not going to get all bent out of shape on it, you know.
Right.
But I mean, that's cool. You know, it's like my friend's about 15 years younger than me, and he plays in a band locally that does like pop punk and emo. And they played emo night, and so I went with them, and it was interesting to see, you know, because when I was in my early 20s, when we went out in LA, and when I was partying, which I don't anymore, but when I was going out partying, they had 80s night, you know, and now it's 2000s. Now basically what it is, they call it emo night, but what they really mean is 2000s night.
Right.
I mean, right? I mean, because they had 80s night, and they had 90s, and now we're on the 2000s, because that's just the way things go. You know,
when you were in high school, before you went to California, was there a music scene that was present in Lincoln, Nebraska? Or
the real music scene in Nebraska is, I mean, in Omaha.
Yeah.
And so that's the nationally and internationally known scene.
Right.
So you have like Cursive and Bright Eyes and The Faint all come from that, in Saddle Creek.
Yep.
And a lot of that was the late 90s and early 2000s. And so I wasn't a part of that. But people that when I had my first band, like this guy, Nate Mickish, he was in a band called The Golden Age, and he like toured with Rilo Kiley, and, you know, he was there for all of what I just said.
Right. Yeah.
He was there. Like, I have friends that were there for the heyday of the Saddle Creek music scene.
Yeah. That's
what really Nebraska is known for, in indie music, basically. Like, and with Lincoln, we do have, the local scene has been pretty good. For the size of our city, only has about 300,000 people, the capital. And we have a music festival called Lincoln Exposed every year. Like, we just had it. I played with my solo stuff. And there was about 110 bands that played.
Wow. That's a lot. Yeah.
And they played all original music. No one played a cover song. And there was music going straight for 4 days.
Wow. That's crazy.
So that's, you know, and Omaha has stuff like that too. Like, they don't have their own festival. That's unique to us, but believe it or not, there are a lot of indie rock bands, and I mean, that was different genres. Like, there's indie rock, metal, folk, and a lot of them fit in that, but there are hip hop, rap, R&B. There is, you'd be surprised.
Sure. Yeah.
But of course, when you think about Nebraska, and I think about Lincoln, a lot of the bands that are popular are like folky, or like almost old timey country.
Yeah.
Or, you know, you think about country because it's Nebraska. I mean,
yeah. You just think of fields.
You just think of fields.
Yeah.
And we do have that. So
what brought you, like, what made you want to move to California?
Well, that's a great question. There's a couple things. I was going to go to college. I was going to go to college in Minnesota.
Okay.
And I thought, man, that just sounds cool. I visited the college, and it just sounded really cold. And one day in high school, like, I was a junior or senior in high school. I was walking down the hallway, and this girl named Brianna Barber, she's like, hey, have you ever heard of Vanguard? It's like, she stopped me, and she's like, hey, I know you're looking at colleges. Have you heard of Vanguard? It's like in Southern California. And I'm like, no. And she's like, well, look it up. And so I ended up looking it up, and it was like, it just so happened that I was able to fly out there and check it out. And I was like, I was sold when I saw the palm trees, and like, what really sold me is the tour guide brought us like me and my parents to this place called the Cove, and they're like in the Cove. This is where Project 86, the OC Supertones, and these other bands started out, and they ended up getting signed. And I'm like, whoa,
Whoa.
if they can do that, I can do that, you know?
Yeah.
And so ironically, I did.
Right.
We did.
Yeah.
We did it. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we only put out one album, but we did do it. We got to do so many things. We got to tour across the United States. We got to see all the states except Alaska and Maine. We could have toured internationally if we wanted to. We were just a little bit too afraid.
Yeah.
But we had like Further Seems Forever's booking agent had reached out to us, but we said no because we just were like, how are four guys in their 20s going to come up with $4,000? You know, it just seems impossible.
Right.
When you sometimes when you're living paycheck to paycheck, it seems impossible, but it's really not. So
yeah, and I think that's probably a scary thing for. Yeah, I could see that for sure. I don't think a lot of people know what the ins and outs are of touring life are, or like what it actually kind of takes in the management and the business side, and just that whole, especially in that era, it kind of seems like that part was kind of removed from people's minds. It's like, oh, you just jump in a van and like, book a bunch of shows yourself and you'll make it. Type thing, but there's a whole business side to it. And like, what I'm curious about for yourself, like when did you decide to start to pick up an instrument?
Way back. That's a great question. Yeah. Way back when I was about 15 years old. Okay. So, and it was more a therapy for me because, my dad had just died.
Okay.
And so a lot of the songs in Slow Coming Day they're not just about relationships, but they're about like grief and the death of my dad. And so during that time, of course, picking up the guitar was like therapeutic. I also went through grief recovery. I went through a grief recovery, got group therapy, essentially. Yeah. And then I did see a counselor during that time. It was a very difficult time in my life.
I can imagine.
But picking up guitar was therapy for me. Yeah. I did it. I had mentioned it to my dad that I wanted to learn to play. And he's like, yeah, I could teach you some chords. And then he ended up dying like only a couple weeks after that. Oh. And someone that was in that knew my dad, that knew me, reached out and he's like, hey, actually, he's like, if you wanted to still learn guitar, my friend can teach you for free.
Yeah.
So I had 6 months of lessons. And then, luckily, like a lot of my friends played guitar, so that I hung out with in high school. So I learned from them, and then the rest is kind of history. I started writing songs pretty early on. Yeah, probably from the time I was 16.
Yeah. I
mean, they weren't great songs, but you know,
they never are when you're that young, right?
Yeah.
I'm really curious, and like it, obviously I want to be sensitive about the subject, but grief as a concept, like what have you learned about grief? Like, it's a really general question, but it's a really important one too. I think for people.
I think I've learned that grief. I mean, there's different stages of grief. There's like shock and denial, and then there's like the grief stage, and there's the acceptance stage. Mm-hmm. It's like a really simple, but one thing I've learned is you go through the grief, and it's kind of like waves. And sometimes you've reached the acceptance stage. You might have gone through therapy. You might have even gone through a grief recovery class. I wouldn't call it class, a group therapy.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself, oh, I thought I was in the acceptance stage, boom, and then you're back into some of the grief.
Yeah.
And the sadness. I think for me, it was really, a lot of people don't realize this, but for me on tour, singing those songs about my dad's death all the time, I was basically like reliving the sadness and the feelings of that, and having to do that all the time, and I was getting paid to be sad.
Yeah.
I mean, that I was getting paid to play music.
Right. But you're getting paid to relive that experience over and over again.
That's the one thing that they don't talk about.
Yeah.
So yeah,
did that feel healthy, or did that feel like, I hate to use this word because it's over. It almost feels like re-traumatizing or going through it over and over and over. That can be a form of kind of like exposure therapy for yourself, where you're kind of exposing yourself over and over. But if you're not in a place to kind of like have the skills or the tools to deal with that,
like, I wasn't in a place to deal with that, though. I will say that writing the songs was very therapeutic, right, and putting them out to the world was. And people would write, because that was in the times where people would write, and they would write to us and they would be like, hey, this song about, a part of me died, this song that's about, someone that they didn't know that my dad had died, but on the CD, I basically, put a tribute to him on there. Like, right. So a lot of people could figure that out if they dove deeper into it. But what I want to say is, I think a lot of people were helped from that. So on one end of the coin, it helped others. Some people even wrote to us and said, some of these songs on this album, Farewell to Familiar by Slow Coming Day, helped us to not, like, I didn't commit suicide because of this record. In the Tooth and Nail, in the Christian scene, when like Christian reviewers would write about the album, they basically said, we don't see any hope in this music. Oh, and yeah, they said, we don't see any hope in this music. And this doesn't really talk about God, and it doesn't show any hope. And we just kind of see sadness here. And
that's so interesting.
And it's kind of hard to get that kind of review when you're young and you read it.
Young dude, yeah.
But to fully answer your question from before, I wasn't really, equipped to do that. I didn't think about, I'm going to be singing this song over and over and over again. And yes, it can help others, but at the same time, it can be a hard place to stay.
Yeah.
So when the band broke up, I swore that the band would never get back together. And we would never play shows ever again. And I was just going to do folk, Americana, alt country music. And I'm not going to sing about my feelings anymore.
Right.
I'm just going to tell stories. That way I don't get hurt. I don't have to talk about my personal feelings. But I realized... Weird.
Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. Oh, no, but I realized that, like, I'm in a healthier mental place than I used to be back then, So it's like, I don't know. I feel like now I could write a song about anything. Like, I can write a song about love or loss, or I can write a song about hope, or a song that it just talks about how hard life can be.
Yeah.
I can write it from a personal standpoint, which most of my songs and my solo stuff are about me personally. It's autobiographical, so I'm putting it out there in the world. And I've done the storytelling songs too, and those are fun.
Right.
But I don't have to, if I write a song, it doesn't mean I have to play it all the time. Yeah. It can just be for that album and let it go. And there was a song I wrote about a really bad breakup where I'm like really gutturally honest in one of my solo albums. And I was playing a show here in Nebraska, and this lady yelled, "Hey, will you play the title of that song?" Like, I would. And I'm like, I can't play that song. It's too painful for me.
Right.
And so now I'm just, when you're playing folk music, it's a little bit different. It's not like rock, It's for smaller audiences, and you can just be kind of rigorously honest. So I'm not saying that bands aren't rigorously honest. They can be. I just think there's, even in this world where everyone knows about each other, there's still a separation when you're on a big stage and there's several hundred people.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's something that was so accessible, I think, especially to young 20 somethings, things about Caraba or Further, or there was a certain amount of vulnerability within those songs that, it didn't hide. Like, there's still times like, this is like really pathetic in my mind, but like, I will still listen to The Brilliant Dance by Dashboard Confessional. And it's something about that song still hits me in a way, like 20 years later, that I'm just like, I need to turn this off right now. Like, this is too even like emotional for me, because it hits something back when I was, much younger, but that vulnerability was like a hallmark, right? Like,
exactly. Yep. And that's what drew people to that genre.
right.
I mean, is the vulnerability. I remember being at college at Vanguard, and my friend Casey, who I was in a punk band with, he's like, "Hey, Ryan, you got to listen to this. It's an acoustic album." I'm like, "Really? That's not punk."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, it's an acoustic album, and it's this guy called Dashboard Confessional, and no one's heard of him yet, but he's like, he's going to be huge. Listen to this." And I'm like, "Whoa, this is like really vulnerable, like really."
Right.
It was sad, but it was like all true, and it was like, man, he kind of. I mean, I don't want to say that he. Well, in reality, he put out his feelings about that breakup, and
Right.
it was really hard for him. And I think a lot of people can relate to it.
And I think really too at a certain junction, the idea of young men also connecting like an emotional experience, right? Like, I mean, as a kid, very emotional person. I mean, that's kind of why I do therapy. Like, I'm really tuned into emotions, and that's why like I'm good at my job, is because I can tune into other people's emotions and ask like really good questions. But like that was always seen as like, oh, you're too sensitive, or you're too,
Yeah.
like my dad, God bless him, would always just say like, you're too sensitive, or if it was like at the church, it would be like, oh, you have a soft heart. I'm like, I don't really know how to take that, but like, cool. But it was cool then to
Yeah.
be like that. I would go listen to bands like Taking Back Sunday, or I would listen to, in the early 2000s. And I grew up in New Jersey, so there was like that budding scene right there that was
Yeah.
going on. And then I went to like my ex-girlfriend would put on shows at the local Elks Lodge. And I kind of got into it a little bit later than that. And I went to school at Oral Roberts University, where I met a bunch of guys who were just all into the music scene there. And like that, it was just like for you. It was like we had nothing else to do. We couldn't party because ORU wouldn't let us party. Like, and we would just go to shows and go to shows. And as a young man, it was like, oh, there's more there. This is something that I can connect to. And not only is it like accepted, it's like you're kind of, it's a celebrated thing, right?
Yeah.
Like in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, well, that's cool for me, like, because I can connect in that
Absolutely.
way,
It's so interesting how, like, yeah, you're right. Like, as a young man, how similar just even our, what you just described,
Yeah.
going to college, hanging out with friends, and, going to shows. And yeah, and being sensitive was okay. It
Yeah.
was, it was looked as cool almost
Right.
in a way. And yeah, yeah. And people would be like, oh, he's like, oh, he's just emo.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
I still have the hair swoop,
this would be
but I usually comb my hair back. But when it's cold here today, so
yeah.
I didn't comb my hair. But yeah,
How did you guys get hooked up with Militia Group?
that's a good question. Yeah, initially, we were just hanging out, going to shows.
Yeah.
And we were hanging out, going to shows, and we were playing shows, local shows. And kind of the epicenters of all this movement was, well, a couple places, right? New Jersey.
Right.
The other one was Southern California.
Right.
And so you had like bands like Noise Ratchet.
Mm-hmm.
You had bands, and then plus all the bands would tour there. So you would see, you could go to see Further Sims Forever. You could go to see Dashboard. Jimmy Eat World was only from Arizona, right next to each other.
Yeah.
And a lot of bands from Arizona like wanted to sound like Jimmy Eat World at that time. But yeah, we met the Militia guys just from going to shows, and we became friends with them, and we would go hang out and like have food with them and eat with them. And one of my best friends was working at Militia Group as the intern.
Okay.
And he became the intern, and then he got a job at Militia as the mail guy.
Okay.
So I would actually go to the label like and hang out with him, and like just I would go hang out there. Like even if I wasn't working there, I would just visit the office because they had an office for a while in Huntington Beach, which was like right down the street from where I lived.
Yeah.
so this was all like local, like we were all, and Chad from Militia Group used to work at Tooth and Nail, and then I was good friends with Rory, and of course, yeah, man, like it was even that Southern California is really large, that scene was like really tight knit,
yeah,
and so yeah, the Beautiful Mistake, we would play shows with the Beautiful Mistake as we would open up for them. And John, the bassist from Beautiful Mistake, was like also one of my good friends, and he was down the street in Costa Mesa, and he was like, just his an apartment with our bass player and with Craig, who worked at Militia Group.
Right.
So we're all like kind of really close knit there.
And he moved from Minnesota, didn't he?
And he moved from Minnesota to be in the band. Yeah. And so, long story short, I mean, everyone just kind of was hanging out together at that time.
Yeah.
And once we made our EP, we were playing a lot of shows, and we sent it out to people. And like when we made that EP, we made it at this place called Love Juice Laboratories, and it was this studio in Riverside. I think we paid maybe $600 or maybe $1,000. Maybe it was less. Like I think maybe we played $800, and we made this EP. We put our money together, and like Rufio had recorded there, and so Rufio got signed to Militia Group. So we're like, if they can do that, so can we. Was kind of the idea. Sure. And so we recorded there. We'd only been a band for 6 months, and we recorded the songs, and so then we made what's called the A Part of Me Died EP now. And the Militia Group said, yeah, we'll put it on our mail order. We're not going to sign you guys officially, but we're going to sell this as it's like from Militia Group.
Right.
So it was mail order. And back then you didn't just stream the songs.
Right. Right.
You had to have the CD. So people ordered it. And what was cool is we got the CD on listening stations in Virgin Records, where I used to work at the record store. And so once it did well in Costa Mesa, they put it in all the ones in Los Angeles.
Oh, cool.
So we were on the listening station in 2002. That was a big thing. And so we sold like all the CDs that you could, and then they're like, we need more.
Yeah.
Cause like, I can't remember, has a certain name when you put us like, you're not on a label, but you put like local music for sale at your local stores.
Yeah. I don't know what the term for that is, but
the term isn't coming to me, but you get my vibe on that.
Yeah.
One. But yeah, so that's how that all came into being. And during that time, Militia Group had, like Beautiful Mistake, Tora Torrance, Copeland.
Yeah.
And so then basically what happened is the Militia Group was selling our CD. Deep Elm Emo Diaries picked up one of our songs. Velvet Blue picked up one of our songs for their compilation, and Tooth and Nail picked up one of our songs for a compilation. And so all of that happened.
Right. That's crazy.
In the same year.
Are you watching this and going like, this is like, what are you thinking about this when it's happening?
Almost like I can't believe it's true.
Yeah.
But I was like, wow, sending out your CD actually works.
Right.
And so I have learned that from my old punk band, because they sent out professional, press kits and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew how it worked a little bit. But I was surprised when we got that kind of response. But bands like Noise Ratchet and Beautiful Mistake and other bands, like Die Radio Die and other ones, were all playing
Die Radio Die, man. What a throwback.
They were all playing in that local scene.
Yeah.
And so everyone kind of knew each other, but I was really surprised that all that stuff was happening. And then I thought, I'm going to send out our CD to some record labels. I sent out to probably, I want to say 10, maybe 7.
Okay.
I sent out to like Jade Tree. I sent out to, Militia Group had our CD already. And I sent out to Deep Elm again. And a couple other ones, and then Tooth and Nail. And then I actually knew this guy that worked at Tooth and Nail. I knew his email. Oh, I didn't know his email, but I knew his name. And so I put on the package, attention, Bill Power.
Okay.
And so I guessed his email because my friends at Militia Group, like Rory and Chad, their emails used to be like chad@themilitiagroup.com.
Right.
So I'm like, Rory at themilitiagroup.com. I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. It's probably Bill at toothandnail.com. So I just sent sent an email to Bill, and I'm like, hey, Bill, I just wanted to let you know that I sent you a demo package of our EP, and I want to know what you think of it. And we're a band from Southern California, and we met in college, and yeah, like it was really short.
Yeah.
And you should be receiving this package in the next week. And he emailed me back and he said, kid, I don't listen to demos.
Okay.
but this lady does. And this is her name. And that was it. It was only a couple words.
Yeah.
And that was it. And then I thought, well, he's going to get the package anyway. A week goes by, and I get an email from Bill. And Bill says, it must be, I used to have it printed out still, not anymore, but it says, it must be Dumb Luck Day here at Tooth and Nail, because I got the package you sent me, and I really like the music. And I actually want to know more about you guys and what you're doing. And I want to actually come down and see you play.
Cool.
And he's like, my
Dumb
girlfriend. Yeah, dude. Yeah. And actually the band was signed from me sending out the CD in the mail. And there's only been 2 bands that have ever been signed to Tooth and Nail like that. One was Flow Me Day, and one was a band called The Undecided.
Okay.
So the label was taking a big risk. We had never toured. We had played shows going up to Oregon and Washington and back, but we hadn't, we hadn't invested time. Like it back then, it wasn't like it is now.
Right.
Is one thing I want to bring up is that back then that actually happened. A&R people saw this. Wow, this is really good. This is like another Juliana Theory or a Noise Ratchet. We can market this.
Right.
We can develop this.
Yeah.
And we believe in like just the raw talent. We can work with it. And now it's not that way, because it's like, I'm sorry, but it's like, if you have over 100,000 Spotify listeners per month, then we already know that you have an audience. So yeah, sure, we'll sign you.
Right. Gone to those days of like what, like the showcase festivals and kind of things like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, what was that showcase festival? That it was escaping my mind right now. But I've basically some friends of mine got signed off of like a showcase festival, basically.
Yeah.
But like that doesn't really exist anymore, which is crazy. It's kind of, I don't know, makes me feel sad sometimes.
Yeah. It makes me a little bit sad. It makes me sad for the younger generation. I like to have bands, because there are some really great young people playing music. And and even before the 2000s, I mean, a long time ago, that's how it worked. I mean, even like a person like Bob Dylan, he left his house, his home in Minnesota, moved to New York City, just started playing at open mics, and he got signed that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess A&R exists, but not for like much smaller labels like Tooth and Nail and Militia Group and all these Vagrant and all these. I mean, it felt like a special time, like special place and time. And I listened at one point to the Labeled podcast about the transfer from like physical CD to digital, and then like that kind of just laying waste to so much of the music industry, just in terms of how music was marketed and how music was like presented in live shows and like all those things. And it's really interesting.
Yeah. There's definitely been a total change now. But in a way, what John Lennon said a long time ago, like in the future, he said, I'm pretty sure he said in the future music will be free or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we are now.
It's super interesting because you and I were talking, or you just were talking about how you were emailing back and forth, like music files and things like that. And I was literally just talking with a client of mine who we just like to talk music a lot, like in the therapy room. And we were kind of talking about, I talked about this too with like a lot of other people on here, but I talked about this with my friend Joe Morin from the band Edison Glass, and he's a drum teacher, and he's like, these kids don't get out to play anymore. Like everything, like they just getting them out to go play a show or play with friends, he's like, it's like pulling teeth. And so we were kind of talking, I was talking about this client a little bit, and I was like, it has become so easy to silo yourself and just like, I'm writing music right now, I've got all the drums for it myself, I play bass, I play, like I don't need anybody else, right? I want other people, but I don't need them. And I was talking about how like the first, like how the postal service was such a novel concept when it came out, right? When it was like, oh, this is so cool. Like Ben Gibbard was just sending files back and forth, like blows your mind. You know what I mean? Like you can make music like this just by sending things, but nothing will substitute for like getting people inside a room and feeding off that energy.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
From each other,
Exactly.
And there's no substitute.
You're exactly right. And like, if I look at if I can even compare the albums that were made, like Farewell to Familiar was made with guys just getting into a room and feeding off the energy of those songs. And like, we had song ideas, but basically me and Brad would be in a room writing the song, and we'd bring it to the drummer and bass player, and then we would finish the song. And it's like, if you look at the other album we had, I'm not saying there's still some good songs on that one, the one from 2019.
Yeah.
But the one that was made through sending emails, it doesn't have the same feeling.
Yeah.
I'll even admit it's not. There's a couple great tracks,
right?
There's a couple good songs and nostalgic songs, but it doesn't hit the same way.
Yeah.
So,
man, I it's so funny because I wanted, like, Militia Group is one of my favorite labels, has always been one of my favorite labels. And I, back in 2006, when I was about to graduate from high school, from college, I really wanted to get into the music industry, and so I remember writing Militia Group an email. I don't know if it was Rory or Chad or who it was, but I was like, what do your guys' internships look like? Like, I just want to go out on the road. Like, and I'm a kid in New Jersey, and they're like, you can come intern for us, but we can't pay you anything. And I was like, well, I got to figure out how to live. So that's not quite. And then I moved to Seattle, and I was like, maybe I can get hooked up with Tooth and Nail or something like that. But it was just a hard, I don't know. I love those labels so much. And I think that was part of it. That's how I found Slow Coming Day, just because like when they would you would just go Tooth and Nail, let me check out this band, this band, this band, this band, and this band. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and you'd get a sampler CD or something like that, or you'd listen on MySpace, or, gosh, what was the old, before MySpace, there was like
Friendster?
No, Pure Volume.
Yeah.
Pure Volume. Like you would listen to things off of there, and that's how I found Die Radio Die too.
Okay. Yeah. Pure Volume and mp3.com.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was pretty cool, because that's one nice thing about being on Tooth and Nail, is that basically they have the power to get the music out to the people, at that time. And like, there's no way that we would have gone past being a local band if we hadn't signed to a record label,
right?
And had that experience. And though there was hard times and good times through putting out an album, touring, and being on the road almost all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we went once our album released on Tooth and Nail, we were, the first year we played Cornerstone, we toured with Emery we played Cornerstone, then we toured with Emery back to Seattle, but their bus broke down. That was their very first tour before they came out with an album.
Yeah. So
we got to know the Emery guys really, really well. I'm still good friends with them. But yeah, man, like, and we ended up doing a makeup tour on the West Coast. We went from Seattle down to Southern California with Emery twice before they blew up. But it's like, what I wanted to say is, in 2004, we played 150 shows. We were on tour with May, Copeland, Amberlin, Me Without You, Watashi wa, Emery, and Gatsby's American Dream, As Tall as Lions, Genoa.
What a time, man.
It was constantly on the road.
Yeah. What is that like? You're sticking, how many guys were in the band at the time?
Four.
So you're sticking 4 guys in a van, driving very little probably life experience in some ways. Like I can imagine, obviously when something tragic happens to you that causes you to kind of grow up a little bit faster, in some ways, but like you're still young and you're still trying to figure this out. It sounds incredibly exciting, but is there a reality to it as well that, like, you know, I look at it from the outside and I'm like, that's my, like at that age, I was like, I'm gonna start a band, we're gonna do this, like it's gonna be so freaking awesome. But I think there's a reality to touring and touring life that is just not out there.
I would say that touring with 4 guys in a band, there are we see the best and the worst in those people. It's like being in a marriage with them.
Yeah.
And you're spending all your time within it. There's not a lot of personal space.
Sure.
That's the hardest part. So the hardest parts about touring to me, the bad is there's not a lot of personal space. You can see the worst in these people. They can see the worst in you. And trust me, there was that, I was guilty, as well with bad behavior on the road. But, as well as, the drives in America can be like 8 to 10 hours sometimes. And so, just the long drives, not knowing where you're going to stay or spending a lot of money on hotel rooms or like staying on people's couches.
Yeah.
We've done all that. And then, the best parts are like having lifelong friends.
Right.
You know, like playing shows that were sold out, like playing for 1,000 people at a time. Like So Look at Me Day got to play, like when we opened up for May, that show was like 1,400, like the Norva. It's like the Norva is like one of the best venues on the East Coast. It has like one of the best sound systems.
Where's it at?
Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Yeah.
Not the best one in all the East Coast, but an amazing one.
Yeah.
And, we got to play for, I think it holds 1,300 people and it's sold out. And there's a guy handing you your guitar. I mean, what?
Right.
I mean, we just went from, that's the story. Like we just went from playing at Chain Reaction, or playing Coos Cafe for a couple hundred people to boom. We're playing sold out shows.
I mean, Chain Reaction's like pretty legendary in this in the scene.
Chain Reaction's still cool. It's still cool. And we still played there even when we had a little bit of success, But I guess what I want to say is the bad parts of touring is being away from your friends and family.
Yeah.
And trying to maintain a relationship is really hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Like that's the real talk now. And so my girlfriend broke up with me when I went on the road, but my actions weren't great.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I definitely probably deserved it at the time, but, and also people are drinking, they're offering you drugs. It can be bad. Like it can get bad quick. The good part of touring is playing your music and doing what you love and making lifelong friends and having a good impact on other people's lives.
Right.
Giving them that time of joy and time of, time where they don't have to think about their daily life.
Yeah.
Sometimes as a musician now, my mission statement's a little bit different. It's like bringing joy to others.
Right.
That's kind of how I look at it. And, but I've been sober for 12 years, like things are a lot different in my life than they were in my early 20s.
Sure. Yeah. And hopefully everyone's life is a little bit different than how they were when they were in their 20s.
I think so too.
For sure.
But there's good and bad about touring. And I'm always wondering, from a therapy standpoint, I always thought, I've heard some therapists talk a little bit about it, but I don't necessarily know if the touring lifestyle is the most healthy.
I don't. That's what always really interests me, right? I think it depends on what stages are. I think as a young man, like your body is very different in the way you handle This is really, really interesting. So, um, most of the guys that I talk to are, they were touring in their early 20s, right? And so that was when they were doing the majority of their things. But like, um, there's a band and there's a singer named Jimmy Stat from the band Polar Bear Club. And he is my age, but he started touring when he was like 2010, in 2010, 2011. So he was a little bit older. And he was just kind of talking about how like the toll it took on him in his mid 20s from watching, and he writes songs about watching his friends move on and progress through life and get married and have children and all these things, and just feeling like completely left behind. And I asked him, it's a very visceral for me, a point on the podcast where I asked him, I was like, what do you remember about the last tour before you guys broke up? And he was like, depression. That's what I remember. Is like, he's like, I was depressed and I just could not, I was done. Like everybody moved on and I'm still trying to. He's like, I had to put everything down after we broke up. He's like, I got a 9 to 5. Like, I didn't want to touch any of my music stuff, and his experience is a lot different than, say, somebody who is in their early 20s touring, where it's like, yeah, you're like, either partying or you're kind of living those early stages of your 20s, which is like allows you to screw up so much, right?
Yeah, for sure.
There's so much growing that you do in your 20s, but like the latter half of your 20s it's like, all right, you got to start kind of like formulating a plan a little bit here,
Yeah.
But like mentally and emotionally, I think you can handle it a lot easier in your early 20s than you can in your later 20s.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I've toured with my solo career. I've been touring since I was 21.
Yeah.
And I'm in my early 40s. So it's like, dude, 20 years, man.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. And so now I have a rule for myself, though. Now I still tour. I still go on short tours, but even when I go over to Europe to do tours, which that's what I really like to do. But I try not to travel for longer than 1 month,
Yeah.
And that's been good. And I have been in a relationship recently. And so I've been trying to prioritize that, and also to prioritize not just that relationship, but other relationships with my friends, and my family and my community. And I'm finding that that's really important.
Yeah. Relationship is important.
It's important to bring people joy. It's important to play music, and those are important things. And art is important,
right,
in our society. But it's also important for me to work on my own mental health and well-being. And to not sacrifice that on the altar of music.
Right. What does that look like these days, though? Like to work on your own mental health or work on yourself?
That's a great question. For me, for for me, it means like going back to therapy, which I've been doing recently, which has been good. I just started that. And and then also having personal boundaries, like realizing that it's good to have personal boundaries, and realizing that if I go on the road, sure, there's the option that I could go to Europe for 3 months and play 50 shows,
right,
and make some money, and that's cool, and that's great. People will be like, "Orion, you're so great. We're so glad you're here in Germany. We're so glad you're here in France. We're so glad you're here in the Netherlands." And I do love Europe, and I love the people there, and they've been so kind to me, and I'll still probably go back and tour there for sure. But I guess what I want to say is having boundaries and having balance, and also, having a spiritual, having a spiritual discipline, having a spiritual walk, not just doing everything for like selfish ambition or vain, out of vanity or pride.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a big polar shift for me from the way it was, because in my 20s, it was like, get signed, and it's like, yeah, look at us,
Right, right.
kind of, and
Of
like,
course, yeah.
and like you said, it's exactly like anyone else in their 20s, like making a bunch of mistakes, and like eventually that's why kind of Slow Community disbanded. Like we disband, not because, like, mostly because of me and my, like, just not doing things well, like on the road, and not just that, but what happens when you're together all nonstop,
Yeah,
like that for 4 straight months,
yeah,
for 4 straight months, like we, right before we lost the main lineup, what happened was is we toured, we told our booking agent we want to go on the road and never come home. Okay, that's not healthy. This is
right.
what we told him. We want to go on the road and we don't want to come home very often. Book us as many shows as you can.
Yeah,
And so that's, we were full of pride coming off the main Copeland tour, and we're like, we're rock stars. I mean, that's not what we're saying, but what really is in our heart is, look at our pride.
yeah,
Like, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean,
and so
why wouldn't you?
I mean,
It's
this
got
is
to be an
just me
awesome
looking,
feeling.
right. You're pumped up, and this is just me kind of reflecting on it
Yeah,
years later, and so we were stupid. That's not a healthy decision. A more healthy decision would have been to have said, we're really glad we're on this booking agency. How about we do a healthy balance of like going on the road for 2 or 3 weeks, or even 1 month at a time, and then coming home
right.
for several months.
Yeah,
That's a more healthy balance. And so, to fully answer your question, I think that doing therapy, addressing issues, having a spiritual practice, and having boundaries in my life is totally necessary,
yeah.
and valuing my friends and family over career.
It's a big one.
Because the world wants to say your career and your money, and these things
Right.
are, if I was after money, I would have quit music back when I was 25. Like,
sorry, you're talking. I am in like a very rough place in my life right now, where like I took a job that I'm was doing it mostly for the money, and like bad decision, very 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 poor decision, and like those things, it does not matter how much you make if you are not following your own value system, or you're not creating healthy boundaries, or you're not, like, money is nice, right? And like money helps, of course, right? Like nobody's going to sit there and say like, well, I choose to be poor versus what I mean? But like,
right.
to do something strictly because, if you're an artist, you create because it's inside you, right? Like it's something that's birthed inside you and that kind of needs to get out. But if you're doing it for money, then it becomes something more than that, right? It becomes, there's all sorts of things that attach to it. And so, yeah, you're speaking my language, just in that sense. And, it's the same thing for therapy too. It's like, you can go and try and make as much money as you possibly can, but like therapy is like, there's a business aspect to it and a side where you need to make money, but like there's also a really high burnout rate. And so like taking care of yourself and taking care of having other outlets is huge too. So you can't just do something because it's like, I'm going to see a bunch of clients because it like financially will make me feel better. There's a certain like, connectedness that you need to be to this position or this job type thing, or else you get burned out.
Yeah. Having balance. It's something
Balance
I'm still working. It's something I'm working on.
Yeah.
But a couple years ago, if you said, Orion, what do you think about balance and boundaries? I would be like, what are those?
Yeah.
And so, as someone that kind of lends to being extreme, like fully throwing myself into only music, and I can still be extreme, like as a sober person too.
Sure.
Like it doesn't matter, like, so at least I have that self-knowledge now.
Yeah.
And, I think overall, I think going to therapy has been good so far. And
Yeah.
like I
Well,
said,
I hope so. I mean, I hope,
yeah,
like some people have really, it's, some people have bad experiences, and it's, that there's, we're human beings too, and like, it's hard sometimes because we make mistakes, and sometimes it's not a good fit, and sometimes it's all these different types of things that are going on in our own lives. And you know what I mean? Like, to me, it's the most important thing is that somebody finds somebody that they feel like they can be vulnerable with, right? Like, it has to be a good fit for yourself. I work with lots of teenagers. Like,
okay,
that's kind of like what I like to do. And one of the things I say, I get a lot of teenagers who are just inquiries from parents who are like, my teenager is blah, 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 blah. Like, the first question I ask them is like, do they want to do this?
mm,
And if the parent says like they're resistant to it, I basically say like, I would advise you not to put them into therapy right now, because if they have a bad experience, if I'm just an arm of your parental authority, if I'm just an arm of like being forced to do something, like, what happens when they need that? Like, they have a bad experience. And what happens if they like really need therapy and they think back to, well, my parents forced me to go to therapy. It just wasn't a good fit. You know what I mean? Like, the less barriers, right? Like the better. Like,
luckily, I had a good experience with therapy when I was young,
yeah.
as a teenager when my dad died, and so did therapy for about 1 year, and I also did the grief recovery program. It's called Grief Share now.
Yeah.
But yeah, if there's anyone listening to this and you've had someone die, I highly recommend going to Grief Share in your local community. And therapy is good too.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but yeah. So luckily, as you said, I mean, I didn't have a negative experience. So now that I've decided to go back as a middle aged person,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
it's not so scary. It's
Yeah.
not so scary. So I think it's helped me so far, and yeah, I'm interested to see, to have some personal growth.
Yeah.
So, and I think staying home and rooting in and putting down roots is kind of contrary to what I've done
Sure.
in my life. And when you were talking about, uh, you know, the guy that had toured a lot in his 30s, like I can relate to a lot of that.
Yeah.
Just like feeling left behind, feeling like at this point all my friends have been married or have kids, and like some of my friends are younger because of that.
Yeah.
And I still have friends that are my age that aren't married with kids, but it's like it's a rare breed.
Yeah.
Like I've never been married and I have no children.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I feel like I'm 20. I'm a 29-year-old stuck in a 40 body.
And I'm
A
sure
bit, so.
there's very many people who are envious of that too. uh like, in those 40-year-olds with kids and marriage, like, they bring on their own challenges.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. With everything, there's challenges for sure.
What are some of
And
your favorite places to play in Europe, by the way? I just like, what's
oh
your
yeah, that's a
favorite?
good question. Yeah. Well, I got to go to Germany a lot.
Mhm.
So I've done 11 tours. So look at me, they never toured to Europe, but I've done 11 tours to Germany, and France. I've also gone to France and Netherlands, Italy. I've been played shows in Italy and in the Czech Republic, in Scandinavia, in Finland, actually.
Okay, nice.
That was really cool. And yeah, and even in Denmark and stuff too. And so in Switzerland. And out of all those, I think I do have and the UK and Ireland.
Yeah.
I would say, of course, I have a soft spot for Ireland, but the best, because my ancestors are coming from there, with my last name being Walsh. But really, Germany is like kind of a home away from home in a way for me. Like,
Yeah.
the people are super kind. They've been super kind to me. They come out to shows always, and I've done a lot of house concerts and smaller clubs, and anywhere from just playing for 10 people to 100. And there's even been like I've even played like outside where there's been hundreds and hundreds of people, or a couple festivals. But I would say overall, Germany's been really good to me for the concerts wise. Sure. And then like beautiful places, I would say there's a lot of beautiful places in Europe to see. But some of the most beautiful places I've ever been to, cities, one would be Prague, in the Czech Republic. Yeah. Prague is incredibly beautiful. Florence.
Great jazz scene there. I did not realize that.
Whoa.
In Prague.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Huh. Prague has a huge jazz scene. There's a lot of jazz clubs, and when we went there, that was one of the things that like we wanted to check out. And there was like some expat in there, like playing jazz at a local jazz club. Like,
yeah, really cool. A lot of the expats, they realize how good it is and they don't go back.
Right.
And I was almost one of those. I really was. And I think it was a little bit of my own fear of like being so far away from family and friends.
Yeah.
And, I have friends in Europe that are great friends. But I think, it's like when my grandma was sick and she was still alive, I kept returning to Nebraska, for that reason. And, kind of like I said, I put my career, on the side so I could be with family.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I had that time with my grandma, while she was still alive. But yeah, you can't go wrong. I mean, in Europe, there's so many beautiful places to see.
My favorite was Bruges. Like I would I would move there in a heartbeat, like without a shadow of a doubt. Like,
yeah.
Anytime. Yeah, it's
Belgium, right?
Yeah.
Belgium's cool too. Yeah. I've only gone to, I've been to Brussels and Ghent, and I don't think I went to Bruges.
Bruges, if you really have to go. I mean, it's, I was used to be, I don't really drink anymore, but I was doing a lot. I was really into like the beer scene and things like that. So like, but that city is completely untouched by World War II. So it's like there's a moat around the city, and it's all cobblestone streets, and like it's amazing spirituality there too. Like there's a couple different like I'm gonna say like there's a nun place there. Like all the architecture is amazing too, right? As it is in all of Europe. At a certain point in Europe when we were traveling through, I was kind of like, okay, new town, new church, new clock tower. Like,
yeah.
You can kind of hit all those different places, but I'd really recommend Bruges. Like, it's such a beautiful city in general.
If I go back to Belgium, I'm going to make sure I stop by there. Then.
Yeah, it's amazing.
For sure. This last trip, I didn't go to Belgium. I only went to France for a few shows. I went to Lille in France, which is near Belgium. And then I shot over to Germany for some concerts, and it was a shorter trip than I usually take to try to follow my boundary of only traveling for 1 month.
Yeah.
Or touring for 1 month. And so I then went to, I also went to the Netherlands and the UK, and I'm supposed to come back and play some more shows in Spain, but I wanted to come back to see my girlfriend.
Yeah.
So I ended up canceling those 3 shows. And
got to do what you got to do, man. You got to follow your heart.
Yep. So, and I think there'll be other opportunities in the future to see Spain. So.
Yeah. One of the last things I just like to ask people is just like, what gets you excited now? Like, what do you like to do? Like, obviously you like to tour and play music. That is your life. Like, that's what you do. I mean, what are you excited about musically or just life wise?
Yeah. Well, I think, lately, I'm excited to write some new songs and record them, but in life, just doing the normal stuff. Of course, yeah, you're right. Like touring is really exciting, and going to see new countries is really exciting. And that's still on my bucket list to see some countries I haven't seen while I'm alive. But I think in the normal day to day, it's cool. Like I teach guitar and I teach ukulele, and so it's
my
been
son's
really...
taking ukulele lessons right
now.
Oh,
cool.
So, yeah,
cool.
He's 5.
Yeah, so
really
I've been teaching. Nice. I've been teaching, and I've really liked that. And it's exciting to see to pass it on to the younger generation.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that. And then when I'm home, I work on call at the local homeless shelter. So
cool.
I've been helping out there, and it's it can be a difficult job
Sure.
at certain points, but overall, when I see someone that like gets a place to live again, or they like get a job again, or they get sober, that's like a huge win.
Yeah.
Right. And so like focusing on, like, there's a lot of like messed up stuff in the world right now, but focusing on that there's still hope is really important. And so, yeah, I'm not always the most positive person, but I try to,
if you work around those things, it's not easy. I was a homeless case manager too. It's not, when you talk about it's just so hard when people are like, how are you doing? Like, how's work? And it's like, good. Like, you're dealing with a lot all the time. You know what I mean? Like, it's and you see a lot, right? You don't get to see the best from people,
You could almost go to therapy for helping though.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's kind of ironic too, just thinking about, you're talking about hope, and then a review of the music of Slow Coming Day was one, we don't see any hope, right?
Yeah.
Like, yep. That's kind of crazy. It's a little ironic,
It's always interesting, but I think, looking back on all of it, I'm blessed, and I'm fairly happy, and it was a great experience playing rock and roll music and being with my friends and doing that. And it's cool. It'll be fun to do these reunion shows.
Yeah.
If people want to come out and they live in California, if they're listening to this, they can go to, April 20th.
Mm-hmm. Where are you playing? Yeah.
Yeah. April 25th is in Oceanside at the Poorhouse.
Okay.
And that's with Jonathan Jones from Waking Ashland and Seth from Watashiwa. All the shows are with those guys. And then Costa Mesa, Orange County, it's on the 26th of April with this place called Dick Church's. It's like a outside restaurant style place.
Cool. Where
we're just going to be hanging out. It's going to be really chill vibes there. And basically, I think it's free or only $10, really cheap. And then we'll play San Luis Obispo area, Atascadero, on the 27th, at a place called Tent City Beer. And then the final place is in Bakersfield. And it's called, and I didn't know if I would ever go back to Bakersfield, but it looks like I am. And that place is called Bakersfield Sound Company. So it's like a music store.
Cool.
So, and we're playing with the guy from Cutlass there.
Nice.
So,
awesome.
Yeah. So it'll be cool. 4 days. And just, we're going to play the best songs on acoustic from Slow Coming Day, the most popular ones. And so is Seth from Watashiwa. He'll play the best songs from Watashiwa on acoustic. And Jonathan Jones, who hasn't played the Waking Ashland songs in years.
Forever. Yeah.
And he doesn't really play out. So this
special thing. It's
special. Yeah. I'm excited. So
cool.
It'll be cool. And we're going to collaborate too. We're going to play on each other's songs. So,
and where can people find your music?
My personal solo stuff. They can just go on Spotify and just type my name, Orion Walsh, in there, and they can hear all the tunes. And believe it or not, I've come out with 8 solo records.
Awesome.
So there's a lot of material.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on, man. And thank you so much for just touching base and doing it so fast too. It's been great talking to you and just being vulnerable about, some of the mental health stuff. I really, really appreciate that.
No problem, Jeremy. Yeah. And if it helps other people, then it's worth it. So
cool. All right, man. Thank you so much. You have a great day.
Yeah, dude. Have a good day too, brother.
All right.
Take care, man. Bye-bye.
I'd like to thank my guest, Orion Walsh, again for coming on. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate him being very vulnerable about his mental health. And going forward, this is kind of what I'd like the format to be for the podcast, is with a tad focus on mental health. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us on all major podcasting platforms. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at The Scenecast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.